410. Y'all might get it booked. I didn't tell back there.
Oh, back to
Hey, John? Okay. I'm good. 410. Healing me, oh blessed hour, with heavenly comfort brought. Whatever I do, where'er I be, still is God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful lover I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. Sometimes it seems the deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's flowers bloom. My water still o'er troubled sea, still is God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful lover I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by thy grace a victory's won, if there's no way I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful lover I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. 988. 988. If he leads us, then we're going to be listening, right? When my Savior calls, I will answer. When he calls for me, I will hear. When the Savior calls, I will answer. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. If my heart is right when he calls me, if my heart is right, I will hear. If my heart is right when he calls me, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. If my robe is white when he calls me, if my robe is white, I will hear. If my robe is white when he calls me, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening, I'll be somewhere listening for my name. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. Please mark in your books hymn number 924. Hymn number 924 for after the lesson.
I don't know, you said you were feeding something. Yeah, I'm hearing things. I have heard voices. Problem with hearing voices when you start answering back, that's when you get in trouble. I'm gonna do something a little different from our normal standard tonight. We're gonna look at some questions, look at some things, and kind of hopefully provoke some thought. This morning, we mentioned James's mirror. Kind of thought we want to look at tonight, the one I had today, and I kept going. Wayne said something to me, and when I first came in, Wayne and Wendy about a nap, and so I didn't get no nap. And in fact, I got home and started to touch up my lesson. Couldn't find it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't on my computer home. Wasn't on my flash drive. Got up here, wasn't on my computer here.
Okay.
So I said, well, there's this thought I've been having. So let's go with this thought and do a new one. Which I didn't mind that. The good part was being up here away from all the distractions that can be down there at times. Yeah. So mainly a bird lately. Chasing children, carrying around their glasses, still them off the head. Enjoy. How would you feel, and I want you to understand that, if Paul came up to you, and I'm talking about Paul the Apostle, and said, Peter, you're sent. Now, the reference I'm making to is Galatians chapter 2, when he withstood Peter to the face. How would we react? That's the thing that we need to start thinking about, and how do we react? And are we always looking at somebody else, or do we ever look at ourselves? If you notice, our titles up there is, for whose glory is it? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Here's a big question. How big is our ego? So we're going to look at a few things, and we're going to look at it in a way to make us look at ourselves, myself included. And if we're honest with each other, we're probably going to do a little praying at home tonight. And maybe pray for one another too. Because when it all comes down to it, it's all to be about glory for Him. Notice in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 30 through 33, Paul had talked about whether to eat meats that are offered to idols or not. He's been going through the discussion. A lot of it is, he said, don't ask and don't worry about it. But if you find out, there's one. But notice what he says, if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I gave thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Now that's kind of like that statement in Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. It should be by His authority, it also should be for His glory. And notice he goes on to say, give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many that they may be saved. I could do a 3-point sermon to midnight over that last verse. Simply because there is so much in it. What is the church all about?
Saving souls.
Saving souls. Saving souls. How many churches have lost that mission? And became more concerned about having bodies in the pew rather than saved souls in heaven. That's where false doctrine goes. That's where getting off the mark goes. This is the point that we're looking at. We're in it for glory. And is it for our glory or for God's glory? That's what we have to ask ourselves. What are we doing? What are we trying to do? Jesus gave us some examples on the Sermon on the Mount. And he brought it up before people. And it's easy to see how he looked at and brought out what some people do, and we see some people. We've seen some people. In fact, if you look up at Washington, why are people doing what they're doing?
Nobody stops them.
Huh?
Nobody stops them.
Nobody stops them,
So they can be seen.
so they can be seen. On personal glory, that's what they're doing. Everything they're doing it's all about them. They'll lie to you, they'll cheat on you, they'll steal from you. They'll do whatever they can as long as their name is promoted. Look how great I am. Notice what he says here. Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds for men to be seen by them. Otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from it. Surely I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be secret, and that your Father who sees the secret will himself reward you openly. Now, Paul kind of said something there Jesus said something there. It's almost an impossibility. How do you not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing? But what is he really trying to convey there? Do it in such a way that you're not trying to show it. That it truly is a secret. Don, you start to say something.
Probably just say keep it in private.
Keep it in private. Keep it in private. Sometimes things are going to come out. Sometimes we have to do that. But what he's really talking about here is the attitude toward it. That's really what he had. What's my attitude?
It should be for the deed of those that you're helping, not puff your own self up.
There you go.
Don't go around boasting.
Don't go around boasting. It should be for the deed should be for those who you're trying to helping, not trying to brag about it, not to build up your own ego, not to boast.
Not to make a show of it.
Not to make a show of it.
Well, and
How far does that go?
well, the thing is, if you're trying to do a charitable thing for someone that's in need, do they necessarily want everybody to know that they're in need?
Well, that's true. You're honest there. Not everybody wants everybody to know all their problems. And that's true. And that's kind of a disservice to them. But let's take this principle here beyond charitable deeds. How far should it go? I'm not sure if it's still being done. In my bulletin articles, generally I sign them with just my initials. You know how that got started? Used to, I didn't sign. And I had somebody that was getting them that wanted to reprint them. And this is a long time ago. And they said, we want to designate them. I said, okay, you can put my initials. Why is that? You know why? appreciate Joey's encouragement, I appreciate people's encouragement on what I do with them and everything, but when I approach them, the hope is, what can I say to help people? And they're teaching. I learned a long time ago, it's not supposed to be about me. It's supposed to be about helping people. Getting people to think. See, I know I'm just a speck in the glory of God. And we need to think about that sometimes. I remember when Randy told me, or I took the job, and he goes, got your name on the door. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, my first thought was, now you done made it where everybody can find me. But I'm sure y'all knew where it was anyway. I just never have been into that. I would come back to the fact that I was a shy little kid when I grew up. I know, hard to believe. Notice what Paul says here, or I keep saying Paul, what Jesus says here in Matthew. When you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corner streets, that they may be seen by men. Surely I say to you that they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go to your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret place, and your Father who sees the secret reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask Him. Again, this is an attitude. You know, there are some people, some of them right here in this church, and I'm not going to name, well, I am going to name one of them because he does a great job when he leads prayer, and that's Gerald. The reason I'm going to say that is because a lot of times you can listen to people's prayers and you know it's coming from the heart. There's other men here that do that. And that's what kind of prayer that we need led. Prayers that are from the heart. I'm going to say this about Don. I appreciate Don's prayer, especially when he's on the Lord's Supper. I've seen Don. I've seen the tears in Don's eyes that tell me how much he loves what the Lord has done for him. And I appreciate that. And I know I can say that because I know Don doesn't do it for himself, but for God. He appreciates what God has done. Too many times people are so concerned with themselves, they're not realizing what God has done really for us and how much we can be an influence to one another. Let me ask this question. If you had to look at yourself and be honest, would you consider yourself an encourager or a discourager? I don't need the answer. I just want us to think about it. What can we do? So there comes into an attitude of what we're doing versus why are we doing it? And it all ties in together. Philippians 2:15-18 says, some indeed preach Christ even from envy and strife, and some also from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerely supposed to add affliction to my chains. But the latter out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. In this I rejoice, yes, and will rejoice. Now, Paul here previously had made a statement that the things that had happened to him had brought about a furtherance for the gospel. I read a thing the other day from a young man that went to the same preaching school I did, but later on, I knew his daddy had been a preacher all his life. And the point of it was, he said, I might not be the best known preacher. And he says, and I'm grateful. And he starts out in this article, because sometimes we get the idea, and preachers are bad about this, they get to thinking they're the best. Sometimes they want to be the best. Sometimes they want to be the best known. And I'll be honest, it's nice when you get asked to speak on lectureship. And I'll also be honest, it's nice when you're not asked. I learned that out. First time I was asked was right after graduating, and I had this sermon I had preached through my senior year several times, and I was even told, take that and dress it up, and told what I need to do for the lectureship. So that was easy. The next time, several years later, it was a whole lot more work when they sent me my topic. And I was like, there's probably somebody else could have done this better than me. Definitely would have been a lot easier, because they make you write a manuscript. It has to be turned in months in advance. It's got to go in the book, but it's got to get edited. And if they disagree with something, they're asking questions. And what you mean here? What do you do? Okay. Like I said, a lot of work. So you turn to Les and say, yeah, I'm grateful I get to sit and listen.
Mhm.
Here's the thing. I like what Paul says. We do want to sometimes question motives. And sometimes we get our motives questioned. But what's the most important thing that Paul is saying here? That Christ is preached, that the truth is preached. That's what's important. It don't matter who preaches it as long as it gets preached. Now, if their attitude in preaching is wrong, guess what they're going to happen? They'll have to answer for that. What about me?
We all have to answer for it, no matter what we do in our life with Christ.
Right, we have to answer for what we do. But if what they're doing is wrong, well, what I'm saying, if they're preaching the truth and their motivation is wrong, how's that going to affect me? It's really not. Because as long as my motivation is right, that's what God is going to judge me on. He's going to judge them for theirs. But now, should I be concerned for someone else's motivation? When you shake your head, yes. Why? There you go. It can cost them their soul. There's where our concern is. Do you not think that Paul was hoping that these people would change their attitudes? Yeah, because you remember what I said when we started, how would we feel if someone came to us like Paul went to Peter and said, you're wrong, you're sinning, you need to stop, you need to change. And not only came to us, but came to us publicly, because it was being done publicly. How will we feel? I know how we should feel. From what we read, it sounds like Peter took it. And Peter needed to take it. And Peter needed to repent of it. And that's how we should take it. Because Paul didn't do it to rebuke Peter as much to show Peter he was wrong and show the others that they were wrong so that they could turn and repent. Notice- Yes, sir.
Before you go on, I think, a lot of preachers get fired because they preach. I had a friend who said this, somebody asked him the question, do you ever regret what you preach? And he said, not as much as I study and pray and pillage through the scriptures and do the very best of my ability. No. I'm sincere. I want to help save people. And I have to preach and people are going to get angry. Let them be angry. And that's all you can do. In season, out of season. Your motives. And people get the wrong impression with motives sometimes. Understand it's God who matters. If we're preaching Christ.
We have to preach the truth, but we have to season it.
Seasoning, but, there's a fine line there, seasoning. We don't want to season it to where it's sweet all the time.
Not where it's untrue,
Right.
we have to be careful.
Well, and y'all both on the right, and here's the point where I've had, and I have had, people get on with me. Ron said in the morning he hadn't, I don't know if he's ever faced any persecution I have. And it's made me do some thinking. And what I was about to say is, there have been times I've looked at something I've said and regretted the way I've said it.
Season it with love.
Season it with salt, season it with love. And then there's times that I've looked at it and the only regret I've had is the way someone took it. And that's the point there, if I've done all I can and I've done it right, and that's what I pray to God about, and they hate me for it and it's the truth, and I haven't went out there to cause offense, I haven't went out there to make them angry, but to try to convince the soul, then my regret is their rejection of it.
Because they're really not rejecting you, they're rejecting Christ.
And that's the point. It's not that they're rejecting me, it's that they're rejecting God, and then there is the jeopardy of the soul, of their soul. And that's the regret I have, is that if I preach the truth, that they didn't accept the truth. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the only regrets we should have, is if we presented something wrong in the wrong manner. I think a preacher should never preach out of anger. Even if what's being done is cause you angry, but at the same time, if you preach out of anger, it's going to come across as being angry, and it's going to do more harm than good.
Well, people can still perceive you as being angry and read that wrong too, so we have to be careful with that also.
Well, there's a difference there. What they perceive and what you do are two different things.
Yes, it's still there.
It's still there, and that's my point. If they perceive it wrong, that's not my fault. Okay?
We're to be angry and sin not, and that's walking a fine line sometimes.
You're right about that, Ray. Ray said we're to be angry and sin not, but sometimes I walk in a fine line, and there is. When we get back to this point of preaching, get back to the point of that it preaches, I've heard preachers be able to tell you how many people they baptized in last year, last 6 months, last 4 months, or over their whole lifetime. I like this point of Paul's. Notice this in 1 Corinthians 10, verses through 16. It says, now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and the same judgment. For it has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Now, how would you like to be Chloe's household? You went to Paul with a problem, Paul brought us back a letter. Well, Chloe's been talking about you. You know what? I got a feeling Chloe didn't mind. Our household. Now I say this, that each of you says, I am of Paul, or I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas, or I am of Christ. What's the problem with that?
Pecking order.
Pecking order. You ever heard anybody say, well, so-and-so taught me? What does that mean?
Put them on a pedestal.
Well, because he taught me, then you ought to listen to me.
I know better.
I know better than you. That's kind of what was going on here. Well, I'm of Paul. I'm of Apollos. I'm of Cephas. I'm of Christ. Notice what Paul goes on to say. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Now notice what he says. I thank God that I baptized none of you except Crispus and Gaius. Lest anyone should say that I baptized my own name. Yes, I also baptized the house of Cephas. Besides, I do not know whether I baptized any other. You know what Paul just said?
We keep track.
I ain't keeping track.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The fact that people are being baptized, people are obeying the gospel and having remission of sins, that's what matters. Doesn't matter who did the baptism. I know preachers, I've known preachers that get offended if somebody else baptizes somebody in that congregation. Folks, I take showers every day. I don't need extra baths. Usually when I baptize somebody, I get about as wet as they do.
I had a
Maybe it don't
lady,
work for me, huh?
I had a lady get upset with me when I was baptizing someone. And I told the lady I was baptizing that I was baptized here too. Someone right behind me, well, I was too. And I turned around and it just caught me totally off guard. She was offended, but I didn't mean to offend anyone.
You know, and that there was no intent, you can tell that one intent, but people do that. Don, who baptized Allie and Scotty? Did it kind of fit in them? Isn't it fitting that you be the one to baptize in a degree?
I appreciate them asking.
There's the point. Why shouldn't a grandchild or a child want their parent or grandparent to baptize?
You got verse 10 up there. And in fact, verse 10 of 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, that's the theme of the whole book, to be
Of the same mind,
same thing, no divisions, and of the same mind.
But the point of that comes back to when we start letting these egos go, that's where divisions come from.
But it's a matter of doctrine that matters.
Doctrine is what matters, and some things don't matter. And some things we ought to sit there and sin for that. That's my point. Paul would later go that say that he planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And that's what's matter. It's all about God to begin with. It's not about us. It wasn't about who did the baptizing as much as it was about being baptized. That's my point. And I used Don because I knew that, and Michael, he baptized his boy. You know, the realization would come back. I baptized some people around here. I baptized Brianna. You know, I baptized Casey. And that's personal. But the reality of it is, I didn't cleanse anybody from their sins. Jesus did. And that's what matters. And if they're more comfortable with somebody else doing it, or somebody else taught them and brought them to the gospel, and they have that respect, then amen, be baptized by them. Because when we start getting to that point that we got to do everything, it starts to become selfish ambition. And then instead of service to God.
In my Bible, I've got marked down ambition, robbery, self-seeking, feud, self-interest.
All we want to attack, I'm going to.
The other side of that may be a little bit of what was going on in Corinth too. I want to be baptized by Peter. I want to be baptized by Apollos. As if there was something special about that person doing this that was going to make it more effective or less effective. Back in John chapter 4, verse 2, when they're talking about Jesus making more disciples and baptizing more people, then there was John put in a parenthesis that Jesus didn't baptize people, his disciples.
Disciples did the baptizing.
Because you can imagine somebody saying, well, I was baptized by Jesus.
You know,
I don't want to be baptized by Paul. I was baptized by Jesus.
you know, I don't have to listen to you, Paul, because I was baptized by Jesus. You know, that kind of attitude, and you know that, I have no doubt that the reason it was done that way was to keep those little egos in check. Because it may be a 3-letter word, but sometimes it's a dirty word, ego. Because we let our egos go and our heads get puffed up and we start doing things. Notice this thing James writes, and who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. What does that word meekness means?
Strength under control, humility.
Strength under control, humility. Oftentimes we take weak means weak. But it's not. Moses was considered the meekest man of all the earth at his time, but was he a weak man? No, but he would give in to people. You want to see the greatest example of meekness and showing strength? Look at the cross. Look at the cross. Jesus said himself that he could call a legion of angels. And he let himself go through that. God, his Father, let him go through that and didn't do anything to stop it. And with a spoken word could have destroyed. Withholding your wrath, when you see your righteous Son being done that way, and knowing it's for the love of salvation of mankind, that's not weak, that's strength. Notice he says, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exists, confusion and every evil thing is there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceful, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and of good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of the righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Think about the point we often do. James is excellent at using the analogy. He's excellent at using things that are logical and wise. Some say that's the only book of wisdom literature in the New Testament. I think it's all about wisdom and wisdom. But I think it's true in that he used practical common sense. I went out there for a minute. But the reality that it comes back to, he shows both sides of the coin. If we got envy and strife in our heart, how can we be hoping to be pleasing to God?
And envy and strife can come about continuously. So that's why we come to service every person. day of the week, so we can sow again, learn to sow again the next week.
Learn to sow again the next week. Somebody got upset with me because I said one time the church is supposed to be our refuge. You go out in the world, what do you see? Nothing but envy and strife. We should be coming here to have peace, and somebody that wants to stir up envy and strife, what are they doing? They're being like the world. And where does that really come from? Satan, concern for self. That's what it comes down to. You ever really, and Ron brought up Cain this morning, you ever look at Cain and really, really look at what Cain says when he's talking to God? Poor old Abel's dead, does Cain care? God's talking to him, trying to get him to repent, and does he care? The only thing he's worried about is the punishment he's about to receive. Poor little old me. See, he killed him out of selfish ambition. He killed him out of strife and envy. So the final question is it with a prideful ego or a humble heart? There's the question we're going to look at. Notice in 1 Peter 5:5-7, likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility. For God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I'm going to stop there. James says that in chapter 4. I believe it's verse 7. Makes that exact same statement. Now, he says, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Now, here's the reality. Are we trying to serve God? Or are we fighting against God? Do we want God as our helper? Or are we trying to do it without God? Go against God. Is that a true statement that God resists the proud?
It's gotta be, it's inspired.
It's got to be, it's inspired, but we also see it when we look at the scriptures. What happened to Jonah?
He was disciplined.
He was disciplined. God stopped him from doing what he wanted himself. Too many times you look at the children of Israel, why were they carried away? Stubborn pride. Stubborn pride. They kept trying to do everything their way. God hindered them time and time again to the point that he said, okay. You ever have a stubborn little child that you keep saying, if you don't stop, I'm going to spank you? And then by the time you finally spank them, you don't just spank them, you give them a good whaling? Why? Because that's what it takes to get the point across. That's what happened to the children of Israel. God spanked them several times, but carrying away, that wasn't just a spanking. That's what we used to call a good old whipping. It gets your attention quick. And they got their attention quick. One thing they never had a problem with when they came back was idolatry. That problem was solved. But you know, I learned, probably not early enough, it was better to listen to my father than to resist my father. I was kind of like children. Israel. It took me a while to learn that lesson, but that's the same thing with God. And we have to put away that pride. We have to put away. Do we want to do good? Yeah. But we'll do more good through humility than we will through pride. And you elders thought you're going to escape. Just thinking about our elder. You know, before I read this, let me get a point here. I have seen good and bad elders. I have seen elders who wanted to be elders because they wanted to be the elders. I believe our elders are concerned about the church, and that's what elders should be. Like we have good elders here. Notice the elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, is also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples of the flock. And when this chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. I'm going to say this. When we made the decision, Casey and I, and it was Casey and I, the lead pastor, our children didn't even know until we had the job here that it was moving, considered moving, that I told her I had one thing only that had to be for us to take a work. There had to be scriptural elders. See, where we left, we had no elders. Something happened today, somebody called and wanted something. I said, that's about my venue. That's not my authority. There's honestly, elders for a preacher can be a very good thing if he understands that. Because there's things that aren't on the plate that aren't his problem. Not his decision, not his to make. And it leaves him free to do what he's to do. Now, you notice what I said, scriptural elders. See, y'all thought y'all brought me out here to interview me. Because it was a two-way street. We were looking too. And to be honest, there were two congregations that it wasn't so much, they weren't scriptural elders, they weren't necessary elders I thought I could work with. Before we got here. And I heard an elder one time tell a preacher, and it wasn't my father, when the preacher said that's not scriptural, he says, I don't care, I'm the elder, and I said, you're going to do it this way. Now, I got a lot of respect for that preacher. He's not alive anymore. He got up that night and he said, he quoted verbatim the conversation and said, because of this, I hereby resign now, and left the pulpit.
Oh.
And I think he was right in doing it. He moved. And before he moved, he had a month to move. The the church had asked that elder to resign. And I think they need to. Good elders don't lord over the church. They serve the church. They may have to make a decision, and we have to accept it, and it needs to be documented. Notice what Paul goes on to say. Bless those who persecute you, and bless those who do not curse. Romans 12:4-3. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil, have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. There comes a realization that we've all got an ego. And sometimes we get our egos bruised. And sometimes they need to be bruised. I have reached a conclusion. Every time I look in the mirror and see a little more hair gone, that is God's way of telling me, stay humble. Try to be humble. See, I appreciate my wife. I appreciate her a lot. Obviously, she loves me, and there's something about me she loves me, but I know it ain't my face. What? It's the meatloaf, Brianna said. But be a bit surprised. You know, there's things you learn as you get older, and you're grateful for. And there comes that point. You want to be humble? You really want to be humble? Hang around with humble people. Humble people encourage one another. You know what arrogant people do? They tear people down. They don't make you humble, they make you feel bad. They hurt you. And they don't even know how much they hurt themselves with their arrogance. Finally, Paul says, for though I am free from all men, I made myself a servant to all that I might win them more. And to the Jews I became a Jew that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. Now Paul writes this in the manner of how he treats people. Paul would call himself the least of the apostles. And yet he wrote more of the New Testament than any other writer. We have more record of his mission work than any of the apostles. But he says, I'm the least. You know what that's called? Humility. He says, I'm grateful to be the instrument. I'm grateful to God for turning me around from being a persecutor of the church to be a servant of Christ. And what I have done, God has done through me. nothing have I done on my own volition. And the important thing is people are being saved. So for whose glory is it? What are we doing? We're looking to serve God and bring glory to Him. That's what we need to be doing. If we can help anyone this evening, we'd ask you to come on the stand. I'll sing.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, just as I am waiting, God, to rid my soul of one your blood, to thee, whose blood can cleanse me sorrow away. Of God I come, just as I am, my love unknown, and broken every barrier down, now to be finding I alone of God I
Al, that was a good lesson. Good job. Needed subject. You helped me.